what I'm looking for technology to do is reduce the amount of time from the idea to the execution, whether that's with a camera or whether that's with an editing system. So in the case of the Red, to have a, you know, super high resolution digital camera that seems to really embrace available light was what I've been waiting for. And in the case of Che, it was what I really needed because we just didn't have a lot of time.
Before we started the shoot, I was at Red for about a month, maybe learning the camera, maybe a little bit more before we actually went to Spain. And this was basically a learning process for me and actually everyone else at Red at the time, which was very small, and we were only a handful of people who were working there. So it was just kind of diving in and seeing, making sure that we could have a camera ready for production, because obviously this was a prototype.
The camera that went over there was basically the first version of the software, which was Build One, and it had kind of the bare bones of camera functionality. So it did 24 frames a second. It didn't support time code at that point.
The problem was, of course, these things were basically not ready. I mean, if we hadn't moved our shoot start by 1 week, then we're not shooting with the camera. So it was that tight.
I was worrying about all these little details of, well, how exactly are we going to sync the sound, and what about this aspect of the workflow, and how can we make it the most efficient? And the guys at Red and Steven were thinking about, well, is the camera going to shoot 24 frames a second? Are we going to get the material that we want? And is the camera going to melt in the middle of the desert? So these sort of things. So the sort of my world of these sort of relative minutia of our workflow sort of were so small compared to this looming issue of, is this camera going to actually work?
While we were prepping at Red, I was getting very nervous, or myself and the other people we were with were getting very nervous about not having another camera or a backup system in Spain. And I think probably every other day we were trying to call Steve and saying, don't you want to have a 900s or a film camera, a Panavision camera? Don't you have something in case these cameras don't work? Even Jim Gennard, the head of Red, I think, was telling Steven it might be good to have a backup. And of course, Steven's response each time was, no, we're going to go with the cameras. I completely trust this camera. We're going to make it work.
I was absolutely convinced that we had to have these cameras for this film, that this was necessary on a creative level for me to have these cameras, and I was willing to put up with anything in order to get them, and I really didn't care if there were problems, or if the heat was an issue and we had to put ice packs. I just didn't care. I just felt like I have to have these, and to the extent of refusing to accept delivery of a film camera package in Spain. I wouldn't even let the production order them. And so it got pretty tense there for a while because people were wondering what we were going to shoot on if the Red wasn't ready. But I was, I don't know, I just wouldn't be denied.
We had a test a week before, about 5 days before shooting. And during that test, we encountered drop frames, which is basically what happens this is from a film perspective. You basically get a scratch negative in the middle of one take. And it can be for one frame or it can be for many frames. And you usually get what's called a green screen of death, which is just a blank green screen. So we found out that these compact flash cards, which were the same thing you use in a digital camera, these little cards were dropping frames. And we're shooting in 5 days.
We're having the drop frame, issue when we were testing I thought, well, yeah, that's kind of significant, but I'm sure they'll fix it. I wasn't really worried about it.
That whole week that we were doing pre-production was mostly spent trying to figure out how to fix that. In addition to kind of adding features and doing all the other kind of special things that we needed for the production.
Whereas you worry in film about the film being flash, there's scratches in the film, here was another worry of whether whether like a computer can have something and can just disappear.
So one night I get an email about probably 11 p.m. and at this point I was still living in Holland, and so it was pretty close to Spain where they were shooting. And the email said, okay, we need the SWAT team to go to Spain and make sure to support the production.
That's one of those things where as long as you know that something's going wrong, like the good news was whenever on the very rare occasion when there would be a frame drop, an indicator would light up, and we would know, oh, we got to check that take. And sometimes we would check it and it would be fine. But at least, unlike sometimes when you're shooting film and you have to wait a day or two, or in our case, it would have been a couple of days because we were in such a remote location. We knew when we were having a problem. And to me, that's, as long as you know that, you're fine. Then you know what to do. It's when you find out 2 days later that you had a problem that you're in trouble.
The crazy thing about it was that the day that we were supposed to go to the production set and start shooting, we got the fix for the camera at 5 o'clock in the morning, and so we were still completely up all night, kind of trying to figure it out because we knew we were going to start shooting the next day, and we got the fix at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then we got 2 hours of sleep.
I think it was the first day they were shooting in a ravine, and there was an army assembling. Hundreds of guys in military, outfits and guns, and then they sort of realized, man, there's an army of people assembling in a, ravine, and if this isn't just shooting, test charts of color charts anymore. This is like hundreds of people, and people flying in equipment from all over the world and stuff, and this thing better work.
We have the cameras all ready to go, and our first shot that we have is a huge shot of 800 Bolivian troops descending on Che. This is the climactic scene which he was going to be captured, which of course this is the end of the second film that we're shooting first. So it's this big panoramic shot seeing all of these troops descending, and about 10 minutes into the shot there's a big warning on the camera that flashes body hot, body hot, body hot. And like, uh-oh, what's going on? And I guess it brought us to our biggest problem is that these cameras were overheating.
When we built this camera, we basically had to get the fastest FPGAs we could, and a couple of them. And so it was the fastest thing you can get, which also generated the most heat, just because it's doing 4K, and that's a huge amount of data it has to process in real time. So it's got a lot of processing power. It's probably equivalent to a whole bunch of regular computers stuffed inside of a small camera body.
And of course, here we are. The temperature is probably about 110 degrees in Spain, and it's very dry heat, and obviously very, very hot. So when it started flashing body hot, I knew that we were going to have to come up with a solution right away.
And so we were trying all sorts of things, changing the body, changing the ventilation and all.